A courtroom in Los Angeles, 2016. A document sealed for 9 years is finally opened. It is a handwritten letter, 3 pages, the ink smudged at the corners, like the writer's hand was shaking. It was written by one of the most powerful men in Hollywood history, and in it, he called his own children wolves in Italian suits. He said his fortune, over $2 billion, had been built on their indifference and spent deliberately in spite of it. Then he named exactly who would receive nothing. The legal battle that followed consumed 4 families, 7 law firms, 11 years of sealed courtroom warfare. It exposed affairs, secret children, forged signatures, and a shadow corporation buried inside a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Almost none of it made the front page. Because, in Hollywood, the greatest stories are never the ones on screen. They are the ones no one is allowed to tell. Music cue. Low orchestral swell. Strings, brass, foreboding. Let it breathe for 4 seconds before narration continues. To understand why Hollywood inheritance battles are so uniquely brutal, so operatic in their cruelty, and staggering in their scale, you first have to understand what Hollywood wealth actually is. It is not old money. It is not inherited land, centuries-old bonds, or the quiet patience of generational wealth. It is creative capital, liquid, volatile, bound entirely to the name, the leverage, and the living presence of the person who built it. And because of that, it does not pass quietly from one generation to the next. It detonates. The Golden Age studios, built in the 1930s through the 1960s, were the work of a handful of immigrant families, men who arrived in America with nothing, and through a combination of impossible vision and absolute ruthlessness, constructed kingdoms that would define global culture for a century. Louis B. Mayer, Carl Laemmle, Adolf Zukor, Harry Cohn, the Warner Brothers, 4 siblings from a small Polish village who turned a Nickelodeon into the most influential entertainment company on Earth. These men did not build corporations, they built kingdoms. And kingdoms, by definition, must be inherited. The problem is permanent and irreducible. The qualities that make a man capable of building a kingdom are almost never the qualities he passes to his children. Louis B. Mayer had 2 daughters. He adored them with fierce, consuming devotion. He also excluded them from every meaningful business decision he ever made. When he died in 1957, his estate, once valued at hundreds of millions, had been so thoroughly depleted by late career failures, boardroom betrayals, and bitter litigation with MGM's parent company that his daughters received a fraction of what anyone expected. The accusations that followed, that Mayer had been manipulated in his final years, that trusted advisors had quietly redirected his assets, dragged through courts for years after his death. It was not the last time that story would be told. Harry Cohn, the feared head of Columbia Pictures, died in 1958. More than 1,000 people attended his funeral. Red Skelton, the comedian, reportedly said, "If you give the people what they want, they'll show up." Cohn had run Columbia through fear, wiretapping, and a management style one biographer described as equal parts genius and sociopathy. His estate entered probate almost immediately. Questions about the final years of his life, about which relationships had produced legally binding obligations, remain even now partially sealed. The pattern was already forming. The first generation builds. The second generation inherits the assets and the grievances in exactly equal measure, and the lawyers prosper regardless of which side wins. By the 1980s, a new generation of Hollywood dynasties was rising, not from the old studio system, but from the explosion of independent production companies, talent agencies, and the vast secondary revenues unlocked by home video and cable television. Kirk Kerkorian, a man who never attended a day of formal high school, eventually controlled MGM 3 separate times throughout his life. He bought it, sold it, and reacquired it with the cool patience of a man who understood that everything in Hollywood was eventually for sale. When Kerkorian died in 2015, at 98 years old, his estate, estimated at over $3 billion, became the subject of immediate legal scrutiny. A paternity claim had been filed against him years earlier, settled quietly out of court. Questions about trust amendments surfaced within days of his death. The estate ultimately distributed most assets through a charitable framework, but the murmurs, the competing claims, the sealed settlements, the redacted documents, never fully quieted. Because, in Hollywood, they never do. Let us talk about Sumner Redstone. Because if you want to understand what a Hollywood inheritance battle looks like at its absolute extreme, its most nakedly human, its most legally complex, its most publicly humiliating, the story of the Redstone family is the one that rewrote every rule. Sumner Redstone built Viacom and CBS into a combined media empire worth tens of billions of dollars. For decades, one of the 3 or 4 most powerful figures in all of American media. He was also, by his mid-90s, the subject of a courtroom battle so sprawling, so deeply strange, and so brutally intimate that it consumed the legal and entertainment press for the better part of 5 years. At its center, a deceptively simple question: who controls Sumner Redstone? Here is something the probate courts of Los Angeles understand very well, and that almost no one outside them ever considers. The fortune you can see is rarely the fortune that matters. The real money lives in limited liability corporations registered in Delaware, ownership obscured behind layers of nominee shareholders. It lives in family limited partnerships built specifically to reduce estate tax while keeping control with the founder. It lives in irrevocable trusts established decades ago in Nevada and South Dakota, states chosen for their favorable laws, whose full terms no heir has ever seen. And sometimes, more often than anyone publicly acknowledges, it lives offshore. The Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, structures designed not necessarily to evade, but to delay, complicate, and reduce the legal exposure of transferring extraordinary wealth across generations. When one of these structures works as designed, it is invisible. The assets flow exactly where the founder intended. The family, whatever tensions simmer within it, receives what it was meant to receive. When the structure fails, when documents are missing, when the founder died before completing the legal architecture, when a trusted advisor turned out to be something else entirely, the resulting litigation is unlike almost anything else in the American legal system. It is not merely about money, it is about the definition of a family's identity. Consider what a major entertainment estate actually looks like. At the top, a revocable living trust, the master document, amendable during the founder's lifetime. Feeding into it, a family limited partnership holding the real assets, production company interests, real estate portfolios, intellectual property catalogs. Flowing out of it, irrevocable subtrusts, charitable remainder trusts, grantor retained annuity trusts, each one a tax structure, each one a potential battlefield. And underneath all of it, the question that will consume years of legal work: were these documents properly executed? Did the founder actually understand what they were signing? If the answer to any of those questions is possibly not, you have a litigation.